Hello everyone, I'm Maria from the Singapore Art Museum. We will be starting this talk very soon. Please note that we will be recording the talk in both audio and video format. We will be publishing this talk on SAM's social media platforms such as Facebook and YouTube. By joining this program, you have consented for your name, audio, and a video to be recorded. If you have any questions for the speakers, do use the Q&A function to type them down. We will be compiling all of the questions for the Q&A session at the end of the talk. We will also be collecting feedback for the program. We appreciate if you can spend some time to give us your feedback at the end of the talk. Without further ado, I shall now hand over the time to Jiayun and today's speakers.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Jiayun. I'm an assistant curator with the National Gallery, Singapore. And welcome to Image as Craft, Chua Chye Teck in Conversation with Yuet Keung, a program for SAM exhibition Wikicliki, Collecting Habits on an Earth Filled with Smartphones. So I'll just introduce our two speakers today. We have, of course, Chye Teck, who works across the mediums of photography and sculpture, and his works seek to reframe the art of looking by reintroducing active contemplation of photographic images in relation to space. And I've had the pleasure of working with Chye Teck on the Wikicliki exhibition. And also with us here today is Professor Yuet Keung, who is an assistant professor of Chinese studies at the National University of Singapore. He specializes in Chinese intellectual history and religions covering Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism, and their interactions from the classical period to the late imperial times. He has authored 6 books in Chinese, with 2 forthcoming, and is interested in making classical Chinese philosophy and culture accessible to the general public. Since 2014, he has been writing a weekly column on Thursdays focused on the Taoist philosopher Zhuangzi in the 𝘞𝘪𝘬𝘪𝘐𝘓 Some of these essays were published as a book called 𝘞𝘮𝑒𝑧𝑎𝑛𝑚𝑒ng, or Divining Dreams in a Dream, Essays on the Taoist Master Zhuangzi, published by the City Book Room, Singapore in 2016. And before we begin, I just wanted to highlight that Professor Loh is with us here today, not only for his expertise in Zhuangzi, but also as someone familiar with crafting images through the medium of writing. And also just to lay out the format for our session today, first we will have Professor Loh share more broadly about Zhuangzi for the first 20 minutes, followed by the conversation between him and Chye Teck. So Professor Loh, please take it away.
So I thought Chye Teck would be speaking for me.
Okay, I can talk a bit. How do I know Professor Loh is also through reading 𝘞𝘪𝘬𝘪𝘐𝘓, and my family buy it quite regularly, and I have the habit of reading them, and that's how I come across Professor Loh writing. One thing it attracts me is this writing constantly use Zhuangzi and Taoism philosophy, and personally I have great interest in Buddhism philosophy and Taoist philosophy. And that influenced my perspective in life a lot. And I think that in that way, it also shaped the way I approach art making. And maybe now we can ask Professor Loh to share with us some story of Zhuangzi, and then we will go further to discuss this topic. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Chye Teck. Okay.
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you very much to the Singapore Art Museum for giving me the opportunity to learn today. I very much appreciated it. I am not an artist, I must confess, right? And so I was very surprised to receive the invitation to have a conversation with an artist today. Though I was flattered, I was actually hesitant to accept the invitation at first. In fact, I declared to Jiayun, I think, that before I declared my ignorance with arts, before I finally accepted the invitation, allowing myself to give it a try, to take this opportunity to learn. Having said that, I also want to say I am not a con artist either. So I am, the question really is, what is art, right? I don't mean to get into a serious discussion of this fundamental question this afternoon, but I guess we all know that not too long ago, photography was not considered art. Even though I have the honor to speak to a fine art photographer this afternoon. I think art, in one of the common usages today, I believe, is literally abstract. And in this sense, in order to review itself, art has to take on different forms and expressions. So it can be embodied in sounds, in colors, in shapes, in images, in symbols, and certainly in language, among other modes of expressions. I am a scholar by training and by profession. I am not a professional writer, however, in a very strict sense, even though my professional life as a university lecturer makes me a natural companion to language and writing. And writing, no doubt, is a form of art. There are many kinds of writing, though, and not all writing are the same. Certainly, for example, academic writing is usually not considered art. But as Jiang mentioned, I was invited to contribute to a weekly column since 2014 for the 𝘞𝘪𝘬𝘪𝘐𝘏. It's very interesting when when I was invited. My editor reminded me that most of my audience are not scholars. So I suppose that means that I should make my writing accessible when I write a column. So I take the cue. I thought to myself that shouldn't be a problem, because I always believe writing, any kind of writing, should not be written for a small number of people, unless it's a love letter, right? And in this case, it should be intended for one and only reader, but a column is not. So writing for a large group of people, a large audience, it's not a problem for me. Furthermore, I believe writing in general should be a pleasure to read. It should not be a form of torture or torment. Even academic writing, I think, can give a reader enduring pleasure and joy. For my weekly column, I suppose it's a good idea to make it entertaining as well. Because philosophy, right? Because I was asked to write on the Taoist philosopher, Zhuangzi. And philosophy can be off-putting and scare people away. So I took up this challenge and try to engage my readers every week. And I've been doing it for almost 6 years now. So I have some experience playing with this column. I am not fired yet. I suppose probably I was doing something right. So I hope the brief background I just shared with you should be able to make one thing clear, that is, writing demands some serious thinking. It is not a direct transfer of ideas from my brain, from my head, to a piece of paper when I write. It's not that simple. Writing actually is about people, I think. So you have to take people in mind, in this case, my audience, but there are non-human considerations involved as well. For example, the immediate concern is space. If you look at the screen here, you can see, right, this is a piece from last week, June 10th. This is the space I have. It's very limited. Originally, I was asked to write about 800 words. And as I kept writing over the years, it has grown a little bit. This is around 1,200. So I actually increased half of the original intended size already. But it's still very, very constrained. So if you really think about it, if you want to write something meaningful, accessible, and entertaining, right? And I aim to be inspiring as well. It's quite a challenge, at least to me. But I've been trying this for quite some years now. So space is a concern, is actually a constraint in a very serious sense, because that limits what I can say and how much I can say about what I want to say. So moreover, every piece has to be self-sufficient. In other words, I am not writing a serial number of essays. They are not. So every piece is a standalone piece. So it has to be coherent in itself. So, but for me, I mean, deep in my heart, I want to make it, every piece could hang together somehow. So that's another challenge probably my reader would not realize, but that's the goal I set for myself. So anyway, these are the non-human factors are important for me as a writer to achieve my goal. So because I do not want to speak like in a university classroom, I want to engage, as I said, my readers into a dialogue, even though I'm not actually speaking with them. So anyway, medium, right, in a sense, I mean, if you broaden out this concern, the non-human factor I'm talking about, medium is very important in art. And I think Chye Teck and I will be speaking from today, right, from our experience, playing with different medium in our own art making, if you will. So I think that's very good. It makes sense to me anyway. Of course, one thing that is common to image making, right, such as photography and writing, is crafting, in my opinion. I look forward to Chye Teck sharing with his experience in taking photographs, taking pictures. But for me, as I said, to produce something in writing is not a direct transposing of idea from my mind onto a piece of paper or onto my computer screen. It's not that simple or direct. There's a process involved. So what I just did is try to give my audience today a sense of where I'm coming from as a participant in today's dialogue. Writing it's not simple. There's a lot of things to be considered if you want to make it at least fun to read, right? Not to mention art. If you want to make it fun to read, there are a lot of things to consider, including the external constraint like space. But today I was asked to speak particularly with reference to Zhuangzi on our issues today. So I'm going to Zhuangzi is a very rich book of ideas about virtually every aspect of human life. So I would encourage you to take a look at the book, Zhuangzi. There are many English translations. If reading the original Chinese, it may not be so easy to you, but I really encourage everybody to try to take a look, read it a little bit, sample it. You might fall in love with it, most likely. So I am going to use 3 stories from the book concerning art in different ways, so that we can get our exchange going. So here is the first one. It's about a carpenter. Basically, in this little story here, we have a carpenter who make wheels. If you look at my background, I picked that for today's occasion. And that's 𝘚𝘫𝗛𝘪𝘬𝘪, that's the ruler of the state of Qi. And he was reading a book one day, right? And this carpenter who make wheels, cart wheels, I was asking about it. And he said, well, I was reading the words of the sages. And who were these people? They were that long ago. Then the carpenter said, well, in that case, what you're reading is really worthless, right? They're like shaft and dregs, worthless. And of course, the Lord took offense to it. And finally, the carpenter would give his explanation from his experience working with woods, right? He was a carpenter. So this is, and as we read towards the end of the story, you know, he had been a carpenter for 70 years, a long time. So lots of experience playing with wood. He understood what wood, the nature of wood is, the peculiar ability of his hands, of his 10 fingers. All these were involved. It's not that simple. I suppose if I ask you something about your hands, your fingers, you probably may not be able to answer me. What are so unique about them? They should be different from another person's hands and fingers. What is the uniqueness? You may not be able to answer me, but this carpenter here, I'm sure he could. So in other words, what I'm saying is, in this process of making cartwheels, you need to know the nature of wood. Every piece of wood is different. You need to understand your own hands, right? Your fingers. The two have, right, one is external, the other is internal. And then there's something even more internal to the carpenter, which is his heart and mind, right? So the external and internal have to melt together, in a sense, to make something work, to actually create, to craft something into being. And that knack is inexplicable in words. That's why in the story, right, I highlighted in red here, when in that process, when you apply your tools, right, to the wood, the force cannot be too gentle, neither could it be too hard. You just have to feel it. Only you could tell. And every time is different. As I said, every piece of wood is different, right? So it's very hard. It's almost impossible to really explain it to you in words. And he said he could not teach it to his son, right? So you have to engage with it and know it in your heart. I think that's very important to art making. and also to crafting. It's very difficult. Only people who have similar experience could really talk to each other in this sense. So this is the first example. I want to draw this point here so that we can think about it. And it has a lot to do with what art is. Certainly it has to do with the nature of human communication and the limits of language. And I mean, for me as a writer, the limits of language is important. I have to work with the constraint, as I said, and limits of the language. Okay, the next example is about a painter. In this story, we have a bunch of, well, what we could say court, here is what court clerks. They are officials who were familiar with painting. Later on in Chinese history, we for example, from the 9th century onwards, at least, we have these court painters. But this is the early prototype, if you will. So there were people, like specialists, if you will, at court who were able to paint at the lord's bidding. So in this case, Lord Huan of Song, on one occasion, wanted to have some picture painted. And we have this crowd of court painters gathered in his presence, and they were getting ready, all set up, were eager to please, to do the bidding, right? Licking their brushes, making the ink, and so on and so forth. And finally, there's one painter who arrived late. He was totally nonchalant, seemingly totally careless, right? So it was just sauntering in without the slightest care. He picked up his tools, right? And then he just immediately went to his own quarters. What we can see here is that this painter is, for us today, we would say he was totally self-absorbed in his own world, even though he was aware there was a bidding for some job need to be done. But for him, his own personal integrity as an artist takes precedence. This is what really matters to a true artist as we read on. So he went back to his quarters, right, totally careless, took off his robe, stretched out his legs, and sitting there naked. When you're really ready, if the order would come, I'll do it. I'm getting myself comfortable. This, of course, is quite in keeping with perhaps many people's impression of what an artist look like today, right? Mostly that image comes from Western artists, right? Unkempt hair, whatever. This is quite inconsistent, right? And actually, it's very avant-garde. Our painter here is totally naked, right? Okay, the third one I'm sharing is this little episode. This is very interesting to me. And usually scholars would not tie this story to art. I haven't seen any, but to me, if you really think about it from someone with some experience of playing art, then you can see the relevance or significance of this episode. So here is a penumbra. Penumbra is the gray surrounding around a shadow, right? So it's the shadow of a shadow, so to speak. So a penumbra said to the shadow, right? He is actually complaining, right? The penumbra is complaining that the shadow seems not to be able to be in charge, seems to be do the bidding of something else. And of course, we know that something else is the form, right? The physical form that is really the, for example, a human figure, right? A shadow accompanies a human figure. And in the right kind of circumstances, you will see a gray lining around the shadow. That's a penumbra. So here in this episode, actually, we have three entities here: the form, the shadow, and the penumbra. Of course, in an ordinary sense, we all know that the shadow would follow the shape, but the form. The shadow would not have any independent autonomy of its own. And similarly, if we push it a little further, then the movement of the shadow would also affect the penumbra. So there's a change of being here, in a sense. So that's why in this episode, where penumbra is complaining shadow, but shadows reply is, so do I have to wait for something before I can be like that? Before I can be this, or before I can that? So the question, the answer, where actually is put on in a form of question. The question is really about who in the end ultimately is in charge. Who actually decides what movement is, how movement goes? What is that? So if you keep asking, again, in an ordinary sense, you would say that the human figure, the form, the shape, is that which decide the movement. But then keep asking. Zhuangzi actually, I think, want to keep asking, who decide how the human figure moves? Right? There's a further question. If you keep asking, it's endless. So here in the story, how do I know why it is so? How do I know why it isn't so? Which is not limited to this triangle or tripartite relationship in the episode. Zhuangzi is just giving a suggestive dialogue here to inspire us, to nudge us, to think deeper, right? What is really deciding how we are or what we are? So if we again frame this in the context of artistic creation or crafting, then we have an interesting question. One might often ask, how do we draw a picture? Let's say you draw a picture, ask yourself, well, why do you draw it that way? Why do you want to draw that particular thing you draw in the first place? Why do you end up drawing an apple, not an orange, for example, or a fish, not a tiger, and so on? So I imagine, for example, a photographer, why are you taking a picture of this, not that? Or why do you want to take it from that angle or whatever, with that kind of lighting? I am not sure if the photographer necessarily knows when he or she is actually taking the picture. For me as a writer, I don't know what I'm going to write. For example, I write it every week. I don't know what I'm going to write for next week column. I don't know. Oftentimes, an idea only comes to me in the very last minute. I don't know. Because I don't have a plan. I'm not writing a textbook, so I don't have a plan. I let things come to me, and it comes to me. I get inspired. I know how to let words come out. Basically, this is how I would. So this is the third story. But speaking of words, right? You have to put words together. Now you know what kind of words you want to, what kind of thing you want to write. You probably know what kind of words you would use, what kind of language you would use. But how are you going to put them together? That's where crafting comes in, right? They are not ready-made. This is not like going to a Chinese medicine herbal shop. You just, all these pigeonholes there, right? You, oh, I need this herb. You just pull out the drawer and get the the herbs. It's not like that. It's totally inchoate or chaotic even. You don't know. Somehow you would give endless possibility, a shape, a form. So your ideas would shape up with the wording somehow you come up with. You find appropriate. I want to highlight one thing here today, and I want to engage my audience today. When usually when we look at writing, certainly it's a kind of image. It's static, right? They are symbols. Usually people would look at a symbol or a graph, a Chinese graph, or sometimes called characters. You say, oh, this character means X, that means Y. So there's this direct equivalence between the symbol and its meaning. That would do for our ordinary purposes, everyday purposes. That would do. But with art, that's not sufficient. Art is not, I suppose, essentially it's not meant to be practical, right? Here, I have a mug here. I can drink water with it. So this mug serves a purpose, a practical purpose. But if someone is trying to make a cup or a mug as a piece of art, that utility should not take over everything. I think it's the artistic value itself should be the primary concern. And so it might not end up being very practical. I don't know. But of course, utility and artistic values are not incompatible. They are not. They could be entirely compatible. So anyway, what I want to say is linguistic equivalence is not enough when you want to create some sense of art with writing, with language. I said symbols are static, but for me, symbols could be dynamic. They are moving. They can do things. If you know how to make the language, make the words play the way or dance the way you want them to. One way is you need to pay attention to the sound of the symbol. So all symbols, right, or linguistic symbol, language, had sound, right? This symbol is pronounced as X, that is pronounced as Y. So every symbol has a sound, at least one sound. Certainly in Chinese, even in English, right? The same graphic symbol could have multiple pronunciation, and oftentimes they will take on different meaning with different pronunciation. And if you know how to play with them, this different pronunciation could work at the same time, not on separate occasion. So that is crafting. Now here, I want you to engage everybody to play with it a little bit. Feel it. There's the 4 lines here, right? Each with 7 words. Read it aloud to yourself in private. Drip, 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 drop. Now this is one way to read it, but that's not the only way. It could be drip, 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 drop, like that. I think you get the idea. So we have 4 lines, and each line could be read differently, with different tones, different pitches, and they could create different rhythms within each line, and as a group of 4 lines. In the parlance of poetry, right, it's called a stanza. We have a stanza of 4 lines of 7 syllables, in this case syllables each. Now, I think you understand, right? the meaning here doesn't matter. It's just the sound. Because you look at the linguistic equivalence of meaning, it's meaningless. The point is sound. I want to engage you to appreciate the power of sound. By the way, the word craft, C-R-A-F-T, right, today in modern English, originally has the meaning of power. For example, in Old High German, the spelling is different. It's the C is a cave, K-R-A-F-T, craft. And some of you may be familiar with this American brand, right? Kraft cheese. Why they pick that one? Because cheese gives you power. That's the idea. So craft means power. The power given to you if you know how to play with craft, play with words, play with symbols, play with image, play with whatever, right? If you're a sculptor, you play with the clay and so on and so forth, right? A painter, play with colors. So try that, you can practice it, and I think you learn to appreciate the power of sound and rhythm. Now, finally here, try it again. This is actually, I'm using a stat, right? The metric from a Chinese poem. In a 7-syllable quatrain. The technical word is called quatrain. In Chinese, it's called 绝句. So we will read, right? 仄仄平平仄仄平，平平仄仄仄平平，平平仄仄平平仄，仄仄平平仄仄平, right? So I highlight the 3 ping at the end because in the Chinese quatrain, they are rhymes. They rhyme. Here in this practice here, we have no rhyme involved. It's purely rhythm. By the way, actually, this is a exercise first introduced by a modern American poet. I'm borrowing it for our purpose today. I don't think he was aware of Chinese poetry, but anyway, for me, there's this uncanny coincidence here in terms of art. So anyway, so in the Chinese case, you even have rhyme, but not only rhythm. Again, if you really read a Chinese poem like that, a 7-syllable quatrain, how you read it would create a different mood, would give you a very different feeling of the poem. So I want to end my little brief talk with this, and I look forward to Chye Teck's input and education.
Thanks so much, Prof. Loh. And thanks so much for sharing about the limits of language, the idea of integrity in creation, and the fact that this process of creation is often from a chaotic and unpredictable source. And I think today we'd be looking quite closely at the 3 stories that you've provided us as almost case studies. But before that, I wanted to invite Chye Teck to field any questions that you might have or talk even about this idea of sound, which has also been a recent interest of yours. Chye Teck?
Sound. I guess when I was the recent exhibition, when I was arranging this arranging and mixing these images of paradise and nothing, in the beginning there are only 4 sides, and somehow I feel that it's very monotone. And besides seeing them as a composition and arranging beyond the eye level, so I extend, because normally painting I'll view at the eye level. So I was given a space with high ceiling. So I think that approach, I can go beyond the eye levels. And but I have problem with only 4 sides of images. And somehow the sound of, somehow the size give me this sound inside my head. There's a sound in my head when I see only the 4 sides, because they are very monotone. It's like a tone of 1 and 2, 1 and 2. So this is, and then I realized I need a third tone so that it can make the whole image more fluid and more playful. So the idea of having all these like almost 5 by 7 inches images, arranging almost like 3 meters, and you hardly see the image or even very low. So this arrangement somehow is the third tone that comes. So it have this 1, 2, 3, and it float up and down. So that is very strange that sound start to be helping me to this sound, the rhythm of sound help me do this kind of arrangement. The other incidents I have is arranging for my book that I produced almost 3-4 years ago. It is called Beyond Wilderness. The book contains very monotone kind of image. They are all black and white, and they are all like, and they all look similar. So these are like the patterns of the branches. And what you see is all this line, messy line again. So when I have this, when I approach this, I see tone also, from a darker tone to a lighter tone, and then to from light tone to dark tone to light tone again. And then this when I make this work, there is also this sound that appear in my head. It's almost like a monotone sound, almost like Philip Glass music. It's always repeating, like a wave coming again and again. I guess that kind of rhythm work in that book, because it almost used as a metaphor of how nature is moving. You know, there's a life force going on. So that is my experience with sound in visual art. Not directly making sound art, but sound that helped me to visualize. Yeah. So this is one of my experience. Yes. Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think also this idea of, you configuring the arrangement because you were adapting it such that it wasn't going to be static, also comes from the fact that this is not the first time that you were exhibiting the Paradise series, for example. And we've talked extensively about the fact that with each exhibition, the size of and the way that you've presented Paradise grows and kind of alters with each experience, right? So I suppose to draw links actually back to what Professor Loh had mentioned about this kind of carpenter who is essentially dissing the written word. I wanted to ask Chye Teck to share also, how the carpenter story in a way is connected to your experience as an art, as a maker of art, and the process of repetition that is also ingrained within your way of making.
So when I start to use photography as a medium in my art making, I find it is very problematic, because the camera capture what it is there. And if I take a pictures of this scene, and then another guy just take the same scene, why do I have the right to call that art and he's not? If he's not an artist, but why do I have the right to call it art? And I find that this is very problematic in photography, because it's too direct. Yeah, it is almost a copy of reality. So that is one of my one problem I face when I start to shift from making to observing, like don't create. And yes, and then also one thing in about 1999, there's so much limited of information how to use photography as a medium in art making. And back then, there are hardly artists purely using photography as a tool in art making. And the only group of artists that are using are performance artists that document. They use photography to document their performance. And some of them, and most of them don't see that as art. It's just a documentation.
Yeah.
So for me to move into this thing is quite difficult. So I can relate myself what the carpenter is doing is like, I don't have information. Also like, and then I have to go into making, and the process is a bit long, slow, and also very painful. And then in the I start to, it's interesting that I start to pair image in a subconscious way, not knowing how it works. But when I put images together, it seems that it creates a dialogue between each of them and also build out context for one another. So that is, and then I realized that is one way that I can use photography. So the next way is I transform my habit of collecting an object and buying them and bring home to just using a camera to collect. So that approach also produce a series. That approach is used on Paradise, where you see in the exhibition, and also I use it to execute another work called Wonderland. And Wonderland is a project that I collect a lot of objects that people don't want to sell away in the second-hand market in Sungai Road. And then I bring it back and I put a background to take. By doing all this action, it creates a reason for me. And I start to understand, why do I remove the object from the background from the surrounding where it's from to the background. And the background isolate the work and also give it a platform for you to look at it. And I also realized from the project that camera are able to scale down and organize, clean also, because these objects are very dirty also. But when you take the pictures, they seems to be more clean. So by not knowing, by doing and reflect, I realized that these are knowledge that a vocabulary of art making that I gained from photography, which I don't think I'm able to read or I'm able to get any guide from any artist out there. So by doing, then I understand also. Later, I also understand by, I'm also interested in how do I remove the photography look of a print. Because of the technology, you are able to print on matte paper. And this approach, when I start to use this approach, I do not know how powerful this matte paper can transform. So these are like, this knowledge is
little discoveries, I suppose.
This knowledge is built out through life. And the more you build out, the more you are more confident and more free, I think. So now I start to also go into using handphone to shoot and to make work, but there's a limitation. This limitation also make me change my approach in just making. So I realized because when you use handphone, the file size is very small, but then you can start to clone the texture and create into a bigger file, which create a new way of making. So there are always there's always a lot of unknown there. And I feel that my art will bring me to discover all this. That is one thing I'm approached this way is a lot of the subject that come to me, like Professor Low, that the idea come to him. It's always by chance I meet them and I discover them. So through years of building up this vocabulary of all these objects that I use, I realize that they are in a bigger view, they are things that left over when we progress. Just like objects we collect, when we progress, we throw them away, we move on. just like concrete when we tear down the building, we destroy it, and then also wire in this progress, building. And then also shelter is something that this shelter is always something that have to move if we are going towards a clean and green country, more organized. This is hide them. And also wilderness is something that we cannot accept this style of aesthetic, organized, compared to a clean, compared to a gardens, gardens is more pleasant than messy bush. So I'm constantly looking into this thing by not knowing. But then through years of working, then I realized, oh, this is something like that. It built out my view. So I do not build out, I do not go from a bigger view, and I could not go to an idea, a concept, and just produce a work like that. So I enjoy this journey. I think it's more fun now because I'm more free in a way, and I have more confident in making my work. So that this is something that that my experience in this making art. And a lot of time when you tell people that this approach is almost intuitive, subconscious, and this approach in contemporary art is really not a nice word or something that is not cool enough, because intuitive is like you can anyhow do, come from anywhere, but it's not like that. So maybe Professor Low can talk a little bit about this Wu Wei, because Wu Wei, like what we talk about, this when we
position of non-action.
This. So we are gathering, we gain the information, not forcing. Then I think that is something that our approach is similar. So I'm not so sure. Maybe do you want to talk a bit about Wu Wei, this action?
The best way to talk about Wu Wei for me now is to keep my mouth shut.
Okay.
No.
Yeah,
I think Prof. Low, do share. I think it was a very elegant kind of discussion that we had, even in the run-up to this talk about non-action being different from no action.
Right.
And is this something that draws from Zhuangzi or perhaps a broader philosophy? I'm curious.
Well, when scholars talked about Wu Wei nowadays, usually they would associate it with Taoist philosophy. That's fine, but of course, if we really look at it more in depth or more critically, there's a lot more. But that's not our concern today. So I think it's sufficient for us to know that yes, Wu Wei, the idea of Wu Wei or non-action, is usually associated with Taoist philosophy. Actually, is one of the trademarks, if you will, of Taoist philosophy. By Wu Wei, the two words, and in Chinese, right, Wu and Wei. Wei is to do things, or an act of doing things. So it could be both a noun and a word. Wu is literally means not having, right? The opposites of you. So therefore, Wu Wei would mean not having an act of doing. Right? Literally, that's what it means. Or the absence of acting, the absence of action, so to speak. So that's the literal meaning. But of course, what really matters is what does it really mean as a concept, particularly for the Taoists. Well, as you just mentioned, Wu Wei, first of all, does not mean no action. So scholars usually translate as non-action, right? Non-action is not the same as no action. Non-action, we can look at it as a form of action. So non-action is still action, is a form of action, but is there is a very sophisticated idea, very complex. I'm trying to try to crack it a little bit for everybody today. But you have to come to appreciate what it really means yourself, because it's complex. Just like what I explained earlier, for looking at it as a linguistic symbol, you could not have a direct equivalence. 𝘰𝘭𝘬𝘧𝘐 means X, done. It's not that simple.
Yeah.
Just like, right, who is 𝘐𝘪𝘢𝘪𝘐, who is Chua Chye Teck? You cannot say, give a brief statement and that's it. It won't work. Even though it's accurate, that statement itself could be accurate, but that is not really what you are as a person, right? So same thing with wu. So I try to crack a little bit so that if you're interested, you can read the Zhuangzi or the 𝘚𝘪𝘵𝘩, and you have to relate what you read to your own living experience, your lived experience as well. Not living, but also lived experience. You actually gone through it already. Probably in some cases, you've gone through it numerous times. So anyway, for example, what do you go through numerous times, actually non-stop, which is breathing.
Yeah.
We all breathe if we are living. But how often are you aware of your breathing?
Yeah.
For most people, no. We are not really aware of it. Right?
Yeah.
So you are actually breathing, but you are not aware of the fact that you are breathing. That breathing in this example is a form of non-action. Breathing is acting, but you are not aware you are actually breathing. So in that sense, it's non-action. So wu could have that kind of meaning. Again, I'm not drawing an equation mark here and that's that, right? I want to emphasize that. But wu could have that meaning. That is to say, you engage in that act of doing things without being aware of it. Not in the sense that you are mindless, not in that sense.
I think it's interesting because it makes me think of something that Chye Teck has mentioned before, which is when he talks about making work, for instance, he says that sometimes you are preparing for a state of readiness, which seems like tautological. You're preparing to be ready, you know.
Right.
But I feel as if, that's that sense that there's a constant motion of repetition, and also in some cases, you know, there's also a form of discipline in that repetition, but it's happening and it's being practiced, but it doesn't necessarily have a tangible, externally visible goal, or kind of end result. So
skill is necessary for crafting. Without skill, you could not craft. Just look at, we're looking at the screen here now. The carpenter had very, very good skills. Right? Without that set of skills, he could not be speaking like that. So skills are often neglected. We think that we can just, if we are a painter, right, we can just paint anyway, or just splash some paint on the wall. That's art. I wish it's that simple. Right? And we're all artists. But you do need skills, and skill need to be cultivated by repeated practice. So getting yourself ready without actually consciously engage in that kind of preparation. That is something very paradoxical.
Yeah.
I can give you an example that we do every day.
Yeah.
I suppose the majority of people would do it every day, which is sleeping.
Yeah.
When do you fall asleep? You fall asleep when you are not aware. If you are aware, you will never fall asleep.
Yeah.
But we try, when we lying in the bed, we want to sleep. That's conscious, right? We want to sleep. But when you lie down, if you say, okay, I'm going to sleep, I'm going to sleep, I'm going to sleep, then you will never fall asleep.
Yeah. Yeah.
You fall asleep when you're totally unaware. But
Yeah.
not mindless, I emphasize. So art, or in my case, when I write,
yeah,
I just somehow, I don't know, it's very hard to explain. Just like what the carpenter said, you need to somehow, you know how to get in that kind of mood of feeling, openness, or in the Taoist term, you get into a kind of state of emptiness.
Yeah.
So that you are receptive, you're open, and you would be allowing things to come to you. I think you're showing this painter slide. I think that's good. I think that's what he was trying to do.
Yeah.
Just in being yourself.
Yeah.
Being yourself so that you can be connected. Sometimes, I mean, a lot of people would close themselves up. They think that's being themselves. I think it's very ironic. I think it's just the exact opposite. When you close up yourself, you isolate yourself. You are not in connection with anything. That's the end of possibility. So, and of course, this is not wu-wei. You're consciously closing up yourself. Wu-wei is opening up. You engage in an act of doing things without being aware of it, even though you are aware of it.
I see. It's a kind of a interesting paradox, as you mentioned, but I would say that in speaking with Chye Teck, over these past years, there's definitely that sense of an active kind of alertness, I think, to the possibilities of art making, and the fact that the works themselves, even after you have exhibited them once, for instance, might suggest something else to you, and to be open to that, and to not be rigid to that as well. And it's interesting also to link, I think, what you were saying about being receptive to how you, Prof. Loh, also read the exhibition when we visited it together.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that when you saw Chye Teck's work, you were reminded of, turtles in the mud.
Right.
Can you elaborate more about this metaphor of Zhuangzi's?
Well, this is an illusion. I need to provide a little background for audience today. Usually when we speak of Zhuangzi, we would conjure up the idea of freedom, right? Some people call it absolute freedom, totally unrestrained. And that symbol of freedom is typically identified with this gigantic bird called Peng, right? Flying from the northern pole, northern ocean, across the boundless sky to the southern ocean. So this gigantic bird is much bigger than our airplane. Anyway, so usually people would identify that symbol with this gigantic bird up in the sky, traversing the entire span of the sky. But there's another episode about Zhuangzi who was one offered a high position in the court as a prime minister, but he refused the offer, and he asked the messengers who came to give him the offer on behalf of the king he said, well, you heard of the turtle in the sacrificial hall in 𝘞𝘪𝘬𝘪𝘐, right? And so it was given a very special status because this turtle would become a vessel for sacrifices. So it was well treated and so on. So he was asking a messenger, would you rather be this sacrificial vessel, right, the turtle, or would you prefer to be a living turtle, right? Rolling around over and over again in the dirty mud. And they said, of course, we want to be the living turtle. So, and Zhuangzi said, well, you can go tell your king. I would rather be a living turtle rolling in the mud. So I think scholars really miss a point when they really focus on this image of the gigantic bird in the sky. I think the turtle in the mud really would, if you were talking about freedom in Zhuangzi's sense, that the turtle in the mud, I think, epitomized that much better. In the sense that freedom is you are autonomous, you are in charge of your own life. You are not limited by any external circumstances other than nature. It doesn't have to be spectacular, like the flying bird in the sky.
Yeah.
Modern readers would tend to admire that. Wow, it was so great, so spectacular. No, when you are free, it doesn't matter. You need to be free from one end of the sky to the other end. It doesn't have to be that. In fact, even if you're given the entire expanse of sky, you may not be free.
Yeah.
Why? I'm being really, really realistic. We are all living under the same sky now as we are speaking. We enjoy the same expanse. How many of us are really feeling free? Very few. So I think the turtle in the mud really epitomized that. Don't look for the external. If you think the external will give you freedom, I think you're on the wrong track.
I see. So in a way, it's also, was it that perhaps in Chye Teck's photography you detected a certain kind of interiority, I suppose.
Right.
And he was pursuing his own vision.
Right.
And in the case of Paradise and Nothing, which were the two bodies of photographic work that were shown, they were very much focused, I think, on Chye Teck's articulation and interest in what was a lot of the time, left out of frame, and not in focus. Yeah.
Right. As I confess, I am not an artist. I don't know any photography. So when I look at it, I'm looking at trying to appreciate it with my own prejudice, which is well, first of all, the exhibit itself, right? What struck me at first sight is that the photographs are not of the same size. They were posed in a non-neat way.
Yeah.
Right? Very random, apparently. I don't know if there's any particular reason behind it, but certainly they are not neat and tidy, like what we usually see in the exhibit. So to me, that configuration itself is dynamic, is flowing. It has some rhythm to itself. And also, one series it comes in color, the other it comes in black and white. So there's a contrast there in terms of colors.
Yeah.
And my immediate impression was that, oh, there seems to be some sort of complementarity of yin and yang, right? Yin is the black and white sequence, and the yang is the colorful sequence. So it's an interplay of yin and yang in a moving rhythm.
Yeah.
That's what I had when I first looked at it. I think that's quite interesting. I may be misreading it, but apparently Chua Chye Teck was finding okay.
I think it's open. You know, it's open to how people read the work. I have my when the work is put together, it's not just what I'm trying to say, but it's also able to open up, to in connect with other people experience in looking at them. It's not necessarily about leftover, not commentary work in our society, but again, it open up this. It may be simple aesthetic of texture and you know, structure. Yes, so it's open. And one thing I want to put is that the craft when we do craft, it's not just in art making. The craft extend to your life of your living. You know, the way you arrange things, the way you grow the plant. This thing is inside you. It is living with you. So I think the art is the life art that is living in the artist that they build up. It's not the physical. It's just an object of the thoughts they went through. I think that is what I think. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's the medium of expression.
Yeah.
And as I said earlier, I don't think that we can really say that there's the direct equivalence between the medium and the meaning.
Yeah.
So yeah. But in this connection, I do want to raise another point, because you do have a name for each sequence, right? Paradise or nothing.
Yeah.
I could not help but have to read something out of the titles. You're using words. For example, if you let's say call your sequence hell instead of paradise. We are using the same picture, all right? Putting it the same way.
Yes.
But I would have a completely different interpretation.
Yes, true.
Right?
Yes.
So words matter.
Yes.
So similarly, you call that nothing, right? The black and white is nothing. Nothing to me seems to be everything.
Yeah.
Right? That's Taoist. When you say nothing, that means it's everything.
Yeah.
It's all, any and every possibility.
That's how you can see my influence from this perspective.
Well, I don't know whether you're actually inspired by Taoist philosophy. For me, because I am already, predisposed that way in a sense.
I think Jia Yun called them blank image. There is nothing you can see. It's a blank image. And then I feel that this blank image is not so forceful. I think I used to take image and force people to look at things that may not be pleasant. It's just they do not take notice. So I'm forcing them. So this blank thing is like either you see it or you don't. So I start not to force you. You go and judge for yourself.
Right.
So I guess it's also a different perspective I take in my life that I shift from. So this is
I think it's nice to also maybe even conclude on this point about limitations. So what Professor Low mentioned about the limitations of language as providing symbols, in the fact that it's not a one-for-one exchange. And I think that also becomes very apparent when you attempt any kind of language translation, where that ratio of meaning or accuracy of intent can be completely scrambled, through that single kind of connection between just two notes in two different languages. And I think for Chye Teck also, a lot of his photography and I would say also sculptural work are about discovering and then also then having to confront the limits of medium. In photography in itself, it suggests as if image making is a direct transfer. That's a kind of a characteristic of the technology, right? But I think for him as an artist, then it becomes a problem, that he actually has to solve. And sometimes solving that problem looks like choosing images that he made many years ago, with the Nothing series. But then through that kind of re-looking at his earlier photographs, the selection then suggests that Chye Teck's interested in a different kind of looking, where the camera is not necessarily so directed and it's not so fixated on kind of providing you with information, but really it provides sensations and suggestions as well. So with that, we thank you very much, Chye Teck and Professor Low. We will now open to the floor for questions. I will read out a question from Ms. Lily Hong. So she says, thank you, Professor Low, Mr. Chua, and Ms. Ching for the interesting session. The idea of 自然而然, with punctuation, it's 自然而然, came to mind when the idea of non-action and sleeping, her favorite action, were brought into the discussion. Anyhow, Lily has a question for Mr. Chua. Prof. Low mentions that art doesn't exist for a purpose, unlike the vessel that he uses for drinking. To Mr. Chua, are artists concerned about coming up with forms of physical entities that are comprehensible to audiences? Or how concerned are you with this issue? She says, my personal experience is that I'm usually touched or find myself harmonizing with a piece. And that is when I concur with the artist, or when I think I understand the artist.
I guess when you make something that the form that you can use like a cup, then it's very close to design. So design has to be comfortable, how you hold and all this. So there is a logic behind it. I think art don't have logic. And not everyone need art in that way. So I guess it's really depend on the person that, when you're ready, you may go and search for this thing. And yes, that's what I think. Yeah. Do I answer the question? Yes.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I think it's a very succinct answer.
Yeah.
And do we have any other questions from the floor? If not, I mean, my sense is that the discussion could go on for quite a bit longer, but we're already running a little bit over time. It's 2:20. So again, I'd just like to thank everyone for joining us for Image as Craft, Chua Chye Teck in conversation with Professor Low. And just to say that Wikicliki Collecting Habits as on an Earth filled with smartphones is open and is now showing at the National Gallery, Singapore. And we do have other programs for the Wikicliki exhibition, such as artist talks and workshops by the different artist-curator pairings. Please do sign up for them if you're interested, and check the SAM website for more details. And thank you so much again, Prof. Low and Chye Teck and everyone for joining us, and have a great weekend.
Oh, thank you, Chye Teck, and thank you for inviting me to learn today. I really appreciate it. I enjoy it very much.
And us too, absolutely.